While Democrats were focused on their epic convention this week, Donald Trump was desperately scrambling for attention, even trying to gaslight America with statements like, quote, "My administration will be great for women and their reproductive rights." To crib from Vice President Harris's acceptance speech, simply put, Trump is out of his mind. And in another bizarre twist, Trump welcomed the endorsement of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who announced the suspension of his Titanic of an independent presidential campaign. During his joint appearance with Trump last night in Glendale, Arizona, RFK Jr. blasted the Democratic Party, saying it was in a, wait for it, conspiracy with the media to keep his campaign from taking off. He also made clear that he sees Trump as a partner and fellow victim.
In the name of saving democracy, the Democratic Party set itself to dismantling it, lacking confidence in its candidate, that its candidate could win in a fair election at the voting booth. The DNC waged continual legal warfare against both President Trump and myself.
Several members of the Kennedy family quickly condemned the move, writing in a shared statement, quote, "Our brother Bobby's decision to endorse Trump today is a betrayal of the values that our father and our family hold most dear." They also restated their support for the Harris-Walz ticket. Joining me now, Maya Wiley, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. Jennifer Rubin, Washington Post opinion writer and author of Resistance: How Women Saved Democracy from Donald Trump. And Barbara F. Walter, author of How Civil Wars Start and How to Stop Them. Thank you all very much for coming back to the Saturday show. Okay, so we got to talk about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. so we can stop talking about Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Maya, what impact is this going to have on the 2024 race?
Very, very little, except it does give the Harris campaign a lot of opportunity for a lot more attack ads. Having sat in a House congressional hearing with Kennedy Jr. on vaccines and on the conspiracy theories that he spread around those, I can tell you that I think you can expect the word weird to continue to circulate from the mouths of the campaign and its supporters when it comes to being able to take on any kind of sense that this is something that might change the dynamics of this race. I mean, and we know from polling that about, frankly, Kennedy supporters were not very strong supporters. They were not deeply committed to him, and that both Harris and Trump really kind of divided up his constituents. So I don't think this will have much impact at all, except in attack ads.
Jennifer, speaking of polls, so this is an average of national polls. I'm going to put this up here on the screen. You can see there. Before Vice President Harris took over the top of the ticket, with Kennedy in the race, Trump was leading President Biden. Now with Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket, she's leading Trump with Kennedy in the race, and with him out of the race, it's just a two-way race. She gets a bump up. What do you make of this?
Well, I think the more people know about Bobby Kennedy, the more people who are sane will not want to vote for him. I think he is a perfect match for Donald Trump. And in fact, if I were J.D. Vance, I would stick by the phone, because he might be just the kind of guy that Trump would pull in as an October surprise.
Oh my God.
He is freakish in every sense of the word, whether it's picking up bear roadkill or eating a barbecued dog. But much more seriously, he's a nut. He is a conspiracy nut. He's a racist. He has come up with all of these cockamamie theories of persecution. In that sense, he's very much a Trump rather than a Kennedy. And I have to say, it's a very sad denouement to the Kennedy legacy. And I think his family is justifiably very embarrassed and really ashamed of him.
Barbara, does RFK Jr.'s endorsement, especially given who his family is, does his endorsement of Trump, I mean, does this play into the autocrat playbook? I mean, I'm trying to understand why Donald Trump so desperately wants RFK Jr.'s support.
You know, I think Trump wants to win, and anybody who could give him votes is somebody he's going to embrace. And RFK, I think, in addition to being weird, is also opportunistic. You know, he contacted the Harris administration to see if there was a place for him in their administration.
Yeah.
He's clearly hoping that he can get something if Trump wins. He's a really interesting character. The Harris administration wants nothing to do with him. And if we talk about voters, it's because most of the left-leaning voters who were likely to vote for Kennedy have already gravitated over to Harris.
Mm-hmm.
So the ones that are left are either people who aren't going to vote because they truly are independents, or they're already Trump-leaning, and that's where they're going to go. He's off the ballot everywhere except, interestingly enough, Michigan and North Carolina. Those are swing states. Michigan is a key state. Trump has been campaigning there in the last few days. That's a key state for Trump to win. And actually having Kennedy on the ballot in Michigan probably hurts Trump. Kennedy is a really weird guy. If he really wants to help Trump, I'm not sure this is the best way to do it.
You know, Barbara, let me stick with you since you mentioned that Trump's been campaigning in Michigan. I mean, he was just in Howell, Michigan, which back in July, which was just last month, you had your far-right wingers, white supremacists, marching through their streets chanting slogans like, "We love Hitler, we love Trump." Can you please, I mean, what message is it sending? What message is Trump trying to send by going to a place that had something so openly racist and vile happen on its streets?
So I actually don't think Trump is in Howell because he wants to send a signal to white supremacists that he's one of them. Although Trump is definitely racist, and that is a very passionate part of his base, I think he's in Howell, Michigan for very, very practical reasons. As I said before, Michigan is key. The closest margin of victory in the 2020 election between Biden and Trump was in Michigan, and the election in November is going to be decided by swing voters in swing states. And Howell, Michigan is in Livingston County. Livingston County is outside of Detroit. It is the classic suburb with the swing voters that Trump needs to win. So, and he's in Howell because it's the biggest city in Livingston County. So I think there are two stories here. One is, yes, this plays into the story that Donald Trump wants to tell his base, that he is one of them. But it also, he has to win these votes, and he has to go to places like Livingston County, and avoiding Howell would be giving up on some of those key voters that he needs.